it off. Thanks so much again for being here, everyone. It's wonderful to greet you as the new Director of Grants here at the Arrowhead Regional Arts Council. My name is Emma Diener, and it's truly an honor of a lifetime to get to work with you and create some art together in the Arrowhead region. So we brought in Tony and Miri, my colleagues here, to help lead this presentation. And I also see that we have a lot of folks that have received a grant from us and currently have applications in the works too. So I hope for this to be a really insightful experience for you, and we'll be saving some questions and time for Q&A at the end as well. So as we move through here, while everyone is getting in the mix, please introduce yourself in the chat with your name, the discipline that you create within, or the organization that you're here representing, as well as the location that you are from. And we'll get to know each other that way, and then move into some staff introductions here. Tony, I'll let you kick it off.
Awesome. Well, hi, my name is Tony St. Goddard. I am ARAC's Grants and Office Coordinator. So for the most part, I'm here as the tech guru. I also help work with Foundant, which is our grant making systems. So I'll be monitoring the chat and prepping for the Q&A, which will happen at the end.
Hi, I'm Miri Villiard. I'm a visual artist by trade. I started at ARAC about 10 years ago on their board as a student board member, and then left the board after about 5 years, applied for a bunch of grants and served on different panels, and now I'm here as the grant writing specialist. So if you ever need help with narrative or things of that nature while writing your grants, I'm usually the person you can go to for that.
And I'm Emma Diener, Director of Grants, and also a musician on the side. You may have heard the music I create with Superior Siren. And many months ago, my bandmate Laura Sellner was the recipient of an ARAC grant, and that started our career. We were able to record our first album and tour it across the Midwest. So I know personally how meaningful grants are from ARAC, as well as how complicated they can be to work within and to develop. So we're here as a resource for you as you move through the application process, and to ensure that you know what you're getting yourself into and that we can bring your project to fruition. So we'll kick it off here with an intro into grants, because I realize we may have some first-time applicants with us today, as well as grant program information, a little bit of grant writing 101 with Miri, and then questions at the end. We have a few questions that you previously submitted that we will be answering, and then any other questions that come into the chat. And if you happen to stump us, we will circle back with our colleagues and team and get back to you as soon as possible, hopefully by the end of the week, because we know we have some grant deadlines coming up. And if you have a small grant that is under review, we will get back to you by tomorrow. So you have a little bit of time with any adjustments you might need to make before that deadline closes. So we'll dive right in. So you can get to know us just a little bit more. We recently just revamped our mission, vision, values, and goal. So this is hot off the press from our recent board meeting. And so this is our new mission, to create a healthy art and cultural ecosystem by offering support and resources for artistic professionals, professional development, and equitable access for arts organizations and individuals to benefit all communities. And so this is part of that initiative. We hope to host more info sessions before and during future grant programs, so you stay more informed and have more time to prepare your materials before the grant round opens. Of course, you can read through our vision, values, and goals. We will be updating that on our website here by July, when the next fiscal year starts. We serve the full Arrowhead region here in Minnesota. So all of those 7 counties you see, as well as tribal nations, that is who we serve. So if you have friends or organizations within those areas, share the good word and make sure they know about all the programs that we offer and that they're eligible to apply for this free money. where does this free money come from? It's a hot topic these days because we actually receive funding from the state of Minnesota and private donations from the McKnight Foundation and not federal funding. And so our programs are secure. They are not going anywhere, and we plan and intend to offer the same grant programs that we have, despite it all. And so you can know that, feel rest assured that when you apply for a program through the Arrowhead Regional Arts Council, and if you even currently have a application or a project in the works, your funding is not going anywhere. It is through the state. So back in November of 2008, the Minnesota's passed the Clean Water, Land, and Legacy Amendment, that logo you see there, which you also need to include in your grants at some times. And as a result, over the next 25 years from there up until 2033, there's a percentage, 3/8% of the state sales tax goes to the Clean Water Fund, the Heritage Fund, the Trails Fund, and about 20% goes to the Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund. And so that is where our funding comes from, as well as private funding from the McKnight Foundation. And that is then dispersed to regional arts councils to spread throughout Minnesota. So the Minnesota State Arts Board is one of them. Highly recommend checking out their grant programs and applying if you see fit, as well as our region here, Region 3, the Arrowhead Regional Arts Council. So this is our mission to allocate this taxpayer dollars to the arts. And you're part of that conduit to make sure that reaches our community. So we're going to make sure that you know a little bit more about our programs and how we allocate those tax dollars through grant programs. So these are the programs that we currently offer. We just revamped them. So if you've been a recipient of grants in the past, you may have known we've had about a dozen options to select from, and we've consolidated them, but the spirit of all of those projects still lies within each of these programs. So we just had the Artist Equity and Operating Support grants. So the first round was in August, September. There's always a grant for an individual artist as well as an organizational group or an arts group, and within our grant rounds. So the Artist Equity Grant was for individuals, and so some of you may be on this call with that grant, or may want to apply for that grant in the late summer, early fall next year, so keep that in mind. And then operating support was for organizations, and I'll get into a little bit more details on both of those programs. But right now, for this session, we're soon going to touch on the Art Project Grant. So this grant is available for artists and organizations in the Arrowhead region. And then the fifth program is a new or small grant quarterly program, and that's a $1,000 grant every quarter. So hypothetically, we should always have a grant program available for individuals at least to apply for when opportunities come up. So with that said, again, the Artist Equity Program here is a $4,000 grant for anyone within a marginalized community, essentially. And we want to uplift these voices. And this specific grant is privately funded by the McKnight Foundation. And so we know that that program will continue. The operating support grant is $15,000, which is pretty rare to find an unrestricted operating support grant for art organizations in our region. So I highly recommend you sharing that with any organizations that would benefit from that support. And so those programs will be offered once again later this year, August, September, and that would be a start date of January 1st, so next year. So keep that in mind so you have plenty of time to work on your project ideation. The second round, which is the round we're currently in, just launched, and you may already be applying for this one. And if you haven't, it's not too late to start an application for the individual art project grant or even the quarterly grant if you are really quick to the draw and you know what kind of artistic program or offering you'd like to create. But our art project grant program closes on March 16th, and that's for any projects that start after June 1st. This could also be for projects in the fall or the spring of next year as well. But when you apply, you'll note the date of your proposed project, and there will also be a date within that application that's aggregated to show you when the funds and when the activity needs to be wrapped up by. Then moving into the organizational grant for art projects, that's a $5,000 art project grant. So for both of them, it's really to produce or present any artistic works, and we'll get more into the details there soon. Then for our quarterly grants, the first round is open right now, and that closes this weekend on March 2nd. So if anyone is in this call and you haven't heard back from us and you've requested feedback, we will get back to you by tomorrow. So you have a little bit of time to get any final finishing touches ready before the deadline. And then the next round opens up April 1st, no fooling, and that will be, again, a $1,000 grant, and that's for any projects that start after July 1st. So you can kind of see that these are meant to supplement our two main programs. So there's always some grant funding available as artistic projects arise. Now, going into some of the eligibility requirements for our programs. For artists, you must be an individual artist. You certainly could represent, maybe you hire a band, and so you have a trio or a quartet. We still would need one member of that band to apply, and that would be the sole individual artist. And you would then, be hiring your musicians, we'll say, for that. Applicants also need to be 18 years old, so it is for adults only, 18 plus, and then a permanent resident of the counties or the tribal nations that we serve for at least 6 months before you submit your application, as well as the duration of the project that you have in place. And usually the duration of that project could be 6 months to maybe 2 years. So keep that in mind, that you will need to remain a resident here throughout your project. And then we also require that applicants must be a U.S. citizen or have attained permanent alien resident status. For organizations, and those are the bare minimums for the eligibility requirements for artists. Now, for organizations, you have to be one of the following, either an organization or a fiscal sponsor with a IRS 501c3 nonprofit status. You could also be a college, a university, or another established higher ed institution within the state of Minnesota, a public school or private school, potentially even a school district, and then also a tribal government in Minnesota. And I'll keep it real here. We've got our dedicated cleaning crew coming into the office right now, and I'm here after hours, so I'm gonna wave to my friend here. Don't mind him. And then we also have some additional eligibility requirements here for organizations. So the project or activity must occur for organizations, at least, in our service area. For individual artists, you can take that money into other areas of Minnesota. But if you're presenting artistic works as an organization applying for this grant, those works will have to take place within the Arrowhead region. The organization must produce or present arts programs, services, and projects that are relevant to the community and have operated as an arts organization or program for at least 1 year. So we want to see that you have some experience in the industry and you can provide a financial statement from that, whether it is the art program financial statement if you're not an arts organization, or if you are an arts org, it's going to be the financial statement of the last fiscal year. And then only one application per program or project is considered. So for instance, you could not be an artist that applies for, you technically could apply, but you cannot receive funding for the same project. So you could apply for the small grant and you could apply for the art project grant, but they can't be for the same project. They could be for different phases of a related project. So they're all their own individual projects, but it cannot be for the same project. So then you just pool all the money together, if that makes sense. So there's a few particulars that you can always reach out to our staff for if you have any questions or need clarification on that. And then in terms of requirements, there are a variety of Civil Rights Act, the Education Amendment, the Americans with Disabilities Act. Those all need to be respected and adhered to and in compliance as best as possible in order to actualize these grant programs. And then you also do need to maintain a complete and accurate record of all of your activities, receipts, photos, all of that. We are not going to ask you for the receipts from your grant funds. However, the IRS could, or you could get audited at any time. We could get audited. So we recommend that you keep those on file for about 3 years, just to make sure you have that for your records. And then you will be required to file a variety of paperwork. We try to keep it light and not too time consuming, but it's actually a really nice moment of reflection in some ways. So once you submit your application, you may be awarded a grant. There will be some follow-up forms and reporting that is due after that. And it's really just about 3 documents, if that, mainly a final report that's about 2 months after the end of your project. And then you have a time to reflect on the impact and you can go back to your application and see if your vision came to fruition the way that you thought, and it probably didn't. And then it led to some other beautiful, moment that you didn't even imagine could be possible. And so we love to hear those transformational stories and how your vision came to reality and the beauty that came from that you didn't even expect. And that comes from feedback, followers, all kinds of nitty-gritty details that Mary is going to get into later on measuring measures and evaluating your project. But those are just some of the required pieces that you should be mindful of before you get into the grant process. And then I'll note here that if you do have any existing final reporting or follow-up forms that are currently due and you're hoping to apply and receive a grant, please button those up because that will make you ineligible to apply for future grants if you do not complete all of your paperwork. So if you have an account, make sure you check all of your past grant funds and click into them to ensure you don't have any follow-up forms due. And if you do, please finish it up and complete it, and then you'll be eligible to apply and receive future funding. The other piece too that's really important is that we always want to provide acknowledgement credit whenever and wherever credit is due. And that is not only to ARAC, but also for the legacy amendment as well. And I see Tony has raised her hand. Please, what do you got,
so
Tony?
sorry. I just wanted to add something on to your point on final reports. I just wanted to
Yes.
let everyone know when you look into that, if it says follow up submitted, follow up complete, as long as you've submitted it, even if it doesn't say closed, you're fine. We have to go through on our end, and it's a whole tech thing of marking them closed. But as long as you've submitted it, you've done your job and you are all right.
That's right. And if submitting another follow-up is not possible because we got to close up one part of your follow-ups on our end, please let us know. That does happen. So at times you may have already submitted a follow-up and we have to mark that complete before you can submit the next follow-up. So please feel free to let us know if we need to do our own due diligence and close that up for you. Then the last piece. Oh,
Shoot
yeah.
us an email. I was going to say, just shoot us an email if that happens.
Yeah, we'll take care of it for you. And then the last piece with acknowledgement, so important to not only use the ARAC and Legacy Amendment logos, but in also the statement as well. And this is required for all state funding. And it could result in you having to return some of your grant funds. And that is also for any final reporting and other program requirements that are not adhered to, such as the Civil Rights Act, the Education Amendment, the ADA compliance. If those are not met, your grant funds could be in jeopardy and they could be requested to be refunded. And we never want to do that. We want to make sure those funds stay in your pocket or are distributed into the community. So please ensure that you're providing acknowledgement not only in writing and online, but and also in person too, and in spoken word as well. Yeah, I'm good. Thank you, though. Have a great night. And so we've got, if you need to make any changes to your grant as you move through it after you've been awarded, just let us know. We usually have a little bit of leniency with some of the dates that you have to submit for any of those follow-ups and your project itself. So there is a little bit of flexibility, but we always have to have that in writing and maybe a conversation about it as well, so it doesn't veer too drastically from the original proposal you had in mind. So with that said, let's get into the art project info. I'm sure you may have a lot of questions from those technical pieces, and we can discuss that at the end too. So here we are. Mary, I'm going to kick it over to you to introduce this program, and then you can toss it back over to me when you see fit.
Yeah, so obviously it opened February 3rd and our deadline is coming up on March 16th at 11:59 p.m. So you kind of have the whole day. Definitely recommend submitting a little bit earlier than that time, just because I think sometimes portals can get a little wonky and you don't want any technical difficulties or the internet going out at your place at the last minute, because the portal will be closed 11:59. And again, that's for projects that start June 1st. You'll have about a year from June 1st to complete your project. So make sure that your grant fits within that timeline, whatever you're proposing to do. And then, yeah, we have it's split between the individual art project, which is $4,000 to any artist in any discipline at any stage of their career. It's going to be evaluated by other artists who are serving on the panels and community members. And you will be up against everybody in all of those different mediums. So we don't separate things out by like visual artist or by musician. It's kind of every medium is represented and competing for the same funds. And then organization art project, again, $5,000 to support relevant, meaningful arts activities with value to the community and that your organization serves. So similar goals. It's broad art projects. Both have a year for completion. So back to Emma.
All right, so what can we fund here? These are a variety of artistic disciplines that we have funded, just to kind of help frame that for you, so you know, like, yes, if you think it's art, it's probably art, but also not culinary arts, unfortunately. So sorry. We love food, but it does not apply to these grant funds. So if you find yourself within any of these categories, you're good to go. If you think of something else obscure, let us know, and I'm sure it probably could apply. As we go through here, now it's a little bit more in the weeds of some text. And what I will say is that a lot of these slides that I'm about to go through are very wordy in length, and all of this information is on our website within the guidelines of each of the grant programs. So you will be able to reference this. We just wanted to touch on some of these things because it helps answer a lot of questions that you might already have. Again, we can fund exhibitions, performances, productions of any creative works. The purchase of supplies or equipment is possible. This is something that's maybe moved around a little bit over the last few years, but we, for all of our grant programs, we will allow up to 50% of the requested grant funds to go towards equipment or supplies that you may need. So for instance, if I'm an artist applying for the $4,000 grant, I could request up to $2,000 worth of equipment or supplies that goes towards the project. And then that other half, it would be made of other expenses, perhaps artist stipend, transportation expenses, framing costs, and technically that's supplies. So keep that in mind as you work through that. We'll get into capital equipment as well, but any capital improvements are not possible unless it is to make your space more accessible or to make that artistic production more accessible. that would require the alteration of a building to change it forever, right? So keep that in mind. If you find yourself in a space that is not accessible and needs that, let us know before you maybe use a variety of funds for your grant program on that. Maybe we can work with you to find some other creative solutions or another funding source, perhaps. Educational opportunities in the arts are absolutely applicable other than academic credit. So you can't double dip into the same funds sometimes, but and also academic wise. So if you want to take a course or a class or another kind of professional development opportunity that's not associated with academic credit, you're good to go. You can use these funds to overcome a barrier to long-term success. So maybe there's just this one thing that's been holding your artistic journey back that you may need, like that one piece of equipment or that one session with a mentor or something that will really transform your life. Think about that. You could reach a new community or market. You could tour your works through the state of Minnesota. Unless you're an artistic organization, you need to produce that in the Arrowhead region. You can travel and use this cost for the cost of travel, lodging, or other things that you may not typically write off in your taxes, we'll say. Attending a conference or a workshop, artist residency programs. Maybe someone hits you up to be their artist in residence, but can't fund you. Here's an option for that. You could hire an editor or a collaborator or other services to bring your project to fruition. And that's really where the artistic magic happens, is when you get to work with other creative types. And then payment to yourself. We always encourage you to, have an artist stipend, not only for your works, but also for your administrative time too. Writing the grant and planning this project, because we know it takes so much work behind the scenes and everyone ends up volunteering so much more of their time than they should, but it's for the labor of love, right? And then space, venue, equipment, other rentals, those are things that we have funded and will continue to fund. And there's a variety of other things that we can fund through organizations here, support services for organizations or different services will say that the organization provides. So art programs, services, and projects that your organization is already presenting, those are expenses that we could that could be grant funded. Again, exhibitions, educational opportunities, hosting events or contracting services to host your exhibition or to host an artist in residency. As well as any workshops or classes, and essentially just providing, access to the arts to your community. The more people that are served through your project, the stronger your application is going to be and the greater impact you will have in the state of Minnesota. And so we love seeing projects like that. What we cannot fund is this fun list. This is on our website again. I apologize. It's like a laundry list and it's not too jazzy and exciting, but we cannot fund general operating support if it's not the operating support grant. If your organization is receiving operating support from the state of Minnesota, State Arts Board, or if you're getting direct appropriations from the Clean Water, Land, and Legacy Amendment, because that's where we get our funding from, we can't have a project that gets funding from both entities. And so those are pieces that will make your project ineligible. If you receive, let's see here, re-granting program. So you can take the funds and re-grant them to others for scholarships or even, tuition reimbursement type of things. Wellness activities, the wonderful world of yoga. I feel like we might have some bit of wiggle room with sound baths, maybe. So we'll see. It's always evolving. And a lot of times we find people have, create a new thing that has never been offered before. And we say, that we could fund that. And let's see, what else do we have here that I want to pull attention to? School programs previously supported by state funds. Anything that was formerly funded by the state and was cut, we unfortunately cannot supplement that, but you certainly could take that program and reimagine it and just recreate something much different for an after-school program, for instance, and that could be funded. Activities that are not open to the general public. So a private event, if you will, or something that's like holistically just going to benefit you as an individual. We want to share this artwork. We want to share your story with others. And so that's the whole part of the beauty of sharing your artwork within community. Again, you'll see the capital improvements in there, equipment over 50% of the costs. And then we get into anything political, that always gets interesting, but contributions to a person that holds office, that's a candidate, political party, organization, an action committee or lobbying. We cannot fund that, but we're not censoring your art either at the same time. So keep that in mind that although this funding can't go to any political entity or support a political entity, you can still engage in conversation through your art. And then any art activities that involve the religious socialization. So that's really for any, really more for like a church service, if you will. You certainly can still host your events within church spaces, as those are oftentimes the only spaces available in rural Minnesota. But those are just a few things there. And then I'll also note before we get into Miri, I know she's got some great points to make. Any expenses that are associated with running a for-profit business. So for all those small business folks out there, if you have an LLC or C Corp, S Corp, you cannot apply, unfortunately. However, an arts group or an individual can apply. So think of it in that way. And know that if you are an individual applying, there will be tax repercussions as well for that. For nonprofits and fiscal sponsors that are nonprofits, there's no tax hit there. So you get more funding towards your art. Miri, what would you like to add?
That was what I was gonna add, was just make sure like you can be a person with an LLC, but your LLC is not what you're gonna apply with. You're gonna apply as an individual artist, and as Emma said, you will be kind of held accountable and your individual income tax for, the receiving the grant. So
Brilliant. Yeah, we want you to get as much of the money as possible. It's so silly. The taxpayer dollars are then taxed. So going into criteria here, this is a wonderful segue. Perhaps Miri, you can take it from here, but we evaluate on 3 pieces. So that's what the reviewers are going to be looking at within the narrative of your application is the artistic vision, the impact and evaluation of that project, and your ability to execute said project in your proposal.
yeah, I mean, I can just say, well, yeah, we'll just go through the grant writing 101 because I'll probably touch on these.
Cool. And I'll also note that right now all the applications are live and all of the criteria questions are available within the guidelines of our grant programs as well. So you can dive in and already see what the artistic vision, impact, and ability questions are and answer those as well. And Tony's got something to add to that too.
Yes. So with this grant, especially for the art project grant,
Yeah.
you may
Talk
go
about
into
arts
your
learning.
grant. Thank you. You might go into your grant and be like, oh my gosh, the narrative's not there. It is, I promise. So the first part of that grant is going to be that general information section. And at the end of that section, there's a question asking whether or not your project qualifies as arts learning. So arts learning essentially is I'm speaking slowly so I can pull up the language, the exact language that we use here. So arts learning would be a project that includes activities whose primary purpose is to engage Minnesotans to develop their creativity and artistic skills by learning about or practicing an art form. This can include classes, workshops, camps, after-school programs, online education programs, community arts education, school residencies, or partnerships. So essentially, it's like, is this a teaching opportunity for you, or are you offering education? So once you answer that question with a yes or no, then the narrative and the work samples will populate based on that, because they're slightly different depending on whether or not you qualify for that arts learning sector of our funds.
Lovely.
And
Yeah.
you can always ask us, if you're not sure, because we've had applicants who've been like, there's like a small portion of their grant application where, the overarching goal is to build their career, but they have a small portion of it is teaching. We still, we'll have a conversation over whether or not that qualifies as a learning grant or just like a regular art project grant.
Yeah, I think that's probably the stickiest part of this particular grant itself. Because we used to host, 12 programs or so, there was an arts learning specific grant. And so we have brought that into the arts project grant. And so we welcome any arts educators out there that want to apply. There is funding for you, but you don't have to be an arts educator to apply either. But that's just an extra bonus offering. Of where anyone that is offering an educational opportunity for others to learn the arts could apply for this program. All right, grant writing 101. Let's hear it, Mary. What do you got? This is where everyone get out and, take note. This is the good stuff right here.
Yeah, so the biggest takeaway here is grants are free money, so it's not money that you have to pay back necessarily. It's all yours to decide what you're going to do with it. Panels are made of humans, so like I mentioned earlier, you're going to have generally like artists from the Arrowhead region who are going to be serving on the panels. With being human beings, you want to be respectful of their time when you're filling out your applications. Sometimes people feel like they have to fill the entire word count because it's there, or the character count. You don't necessarily have to do that. If you're answering all of the questions and you're doing it in a couple, sentences that actually like answer all of the questions, then that's totally okay and probably appreciated on the other side. When people are reading, 40 plus applications over and over again through the grant review process, you just want to make sure that you're not doing things like copying and pasting the same answer all throughout the thing or all throughout the application, because that's another issue I've seen or had us come across before. And then my little formula for, a successful grant is it's a mixture of excitement and thoroughness. So excitement is kind of like, what is it about this grant that's going to impact you or your community? Bonus points if it's both of those things. With thoroughness, I usually recommend people go through and like copy and paste those questions from the grant and answer each question in like one sentence, and then kind of go back in and fill in the details, because what you want to do is make sure that you're answering every question. Panels generally, like, you don't want them to ask questions, right? Because the application is basically you. It's your representation in the room. They won't be able to use like external links to look you up. Nobody's going to Google you. Everything that you write in the application is going to be what they use to make their decision. And so if you're missing an answer to one of the questions, or, if you're leaning way too heavily into the excitement and you lose track of, what your project actually is, that can be a detriment to your score. And then the inverse is also true. So if you're leaning too much into just like the bullet point lists of like, here's what I'm going to do, and you're not talking about like why you're excited about it, that can also be difficult for panelists to review. And then let's see. Yeah, okay. That was it. That was it on that section. Next slide. My pep talk for folks is don't feel bad for asking. So we as a funder need to give away this money. It doesn't benefit us to hold on to it at all. And this is true for pretty much all funders. Like, we have to get rid of it. And so we encourage people to ask for the full amounts and you know, pay themselves and do all of those things. Like the expectation is that you need this money and you're, you know, being honest about what you're going to use it for. My little pro tip there is like sometimes people have had their scores docked on feasibility, on that criteria of feasibility, which is basically, you know, your ability to go through with a project because they underestimated what the cost was going to be. So make sure that you're articulating, you know, the full cost of what it is that you're doing. If that budget, you know, if what you're doing is going to cost a lot more than what the grant can cover, just make sure to articulate in that thoroughness of your grant story, like how you're going to pay for the rest of it. And then we talked a little bit about the legacy amendment, so I don't need to say much there. Next slide. Evaluation, the most important slide on our entire slide deck potentially. So this is the area where I think 90% of like people's scores get docked because people don't take the evaluation questions seriously, or you know, they just kind of come up with filler text like I'm going to do a survey and then just leave it at that. When we ask for evaluation, it's going to be like 2 questions. It's going to be like, what are the goals of the project? And then after that, it's going to ask you like, how will you know you're successful? And under that, how will you know you're successful? It's going to be, what are the tools that you're going to use to measure your goals? So usually the goals are going to be statements of like what your project causes. And so some examples here are like audience feelings and opinions. If there's specific demographics that you want to reach, or you could list percentages of those target demographics that you want to turn up in your audience. And these can be estimates, right? Any new skills or abilities you develop as a result of a project. If you're going for an approach like that, like I want to learn to paint in this specific style, a good tool then in the second question to measure that is like reaching out to a mentor to give you a critique, or getting audience feedback on, you know, what they think, or I don't know, you know, things like that. I think the mentor one is a really good one when you're trying to learn a new skill. Or maybe you get a certification at the end of it. Any types of connections formed through the process, keeping within your budget parameters is a goal people sometimes have. Any experiences that you get to have as a result of the artwork being completed, any opportunities gained, or comprehension the audience might gain as a result of your work. The big thing is don't just put I will complete the project in your goals, because the entire point of the grant is to suggest that you're going to complete a project. We're looking more for like, what is it that you will be specifically completing and how will that be like measured? So yeah, you can do next slide. Yeah, and then a big tip here is like a lot of folks when they're writing their artist statement will say things like, you know, I create art because I want people to feel something, or I create art because my art is like a reflection of the human condition in some capacity. And unfortunately, I would say that is what most artists are trying to do. And so the artist statement space, or, you know, when you're talking about where you place yourself in your field and in your work, you're going to want to like be more specific than that and just think about like, what is it about your work that stands apart from another painter or another musician, or, you know, what is it that inspires your work that might be a little bit different than someone else? So another important point. And then a final thought that I didn't list on that last measurement slide, but measurement is also for you when you do that final report, for you to gauge like whether or not you were successful or not. So say you said you're going to have like 100, your goal is to have 150 people attend your concert, and then you get the grant, you complete it, and only 135 people show up. You're not going to be like asked to, you know, return a portion of the grant if, you know, you overestimated, right? It's just kind of like a space where you can compare, you know, and think about like, you know, celebrating basically, right, that you got close to your goal, and then maybe thinking and reflecting on like, what could you have done differently to get that extra 20 people to show up? So use measurements that also are like useful for you. Again, I use the survey example. A lot of people say that like I'll conduct a survey with my audience to see if they like the work. And if that's not useful for you, like if you don't need a survey and you're not actually curious about something that your audience thinks about your work, don't use a survey. You know, pick measurements and tools that are actually like things that you want to know about your work, and things that can help you grow, and like feedback that can, you know, it's all about kind of growing, right? So those are some reflections on measurements. The most popular area by far to lose points is on that section. So take your time, think about it. And if you don't know how to measure something, or you know what a reasonable goal might be, email us and we can help you brainstorm.
All right, y'all ready to apply for your grants now? Ready to rumble? As you may know, our grant portal is located on our website at aracouncil.org. And if you have not set up an account, you can create an account from there. If you currently have an account, wonderful. If you need support with your account, maybe some contacts have changed, or you want to clear out some old stuff and you have questions about it, let us know. Tony is a wonderful, wonderful tech specialist and will help navigate you through the wonderful world of Foundant. So again, peruse our website. All of the grant guidelines are listed there. And so I thought to give a little bit of a wrap up here before we go into Q&A, just to give you a feel of what that review process looks like. When you submit your applications and the grant period is closed, it then goes through an internal staff review as well as a review panel. So if you're ever interested in learning more about the review process, I highly recommend becoming a panel reviewer. You can find a link for that on our website as well and see what the guidelines are. But that's a great way to get a behind the scenes take on what the grant reviewers are looking for and how to strengthen your own application in the future too. So we put that call for reviewers out. It's going out right about now and the next couple of weeks here. And then they're selected based on the type of grant, expertise, their experience, location, essentially whatever pool of applicants we get. We try to mirror that within our panels, so there's representation and understanding for the mediums that are represented there. And then the process, so our staff here will review on a rolling basis, usually up until 2 weeks after the application, or however quickly we get through all of them. And then we review that for any technicalities or narrative sadly, some narrative flaws that could be tragic and then make your application not eligible because you're presenting your works in the state of Wisconsin. So we look for those pieces and we will inform you if your application is ineligible. Tony, do you want to add something for that staff internal review?
Oh, I'm
Or
sorry,
something
for a
else?
second. I thought you were talking about requesting grant advisement or review prior, and that needs to
Yeah.
be submitted 2 weeks before the deadline. You said after, and I just want to clarify that might have been a
Mm. Sure. Yeah. Thank you for catching. Yeah. Any words that snafu, always appreciate it. And yeah, this is for what happens after your application has been submitted. Going back to that though, if you would like us to review your application for any technicalities or narrative pieces, we certainly can work with you on that. We already have quite the queue of folks that have shown interest in having their applications reviewed. So we're working on those as quickly as possible, and we'll get to everyone as quickly as we can. And then, technically, March 6th, I would say try to get your application request to have any reviews in by March 6th at the latest, if not, sometime next week already. So it's coming down to crunch time, and that's usually when we get an influx of inquiries. So we'll get back to you as soon as we can and support you throughout that process. So we appreciate your patience as we have received an influx of interest in our programs. But after you submit the application, our staff reviews it for a couple weeks, and then it goes to the panel review. That process can take 2 to 6 weeks, and then the board of directors after the panel has made their recommendations, the board of directors looks at that, and then they put their stamp of approval. And usually, for this grant round, you hypothetically should know by the end of May if you receive the grant or not. And so it takes time. It's a few months. And Miri, maybe you can add a note on that too.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, again, back to that other slide of don't feel bad for asking. Like, don't feel bad for asking for us to review your stuff. It's literally like pretty much 80% of my job is doing that. So I really, appreciate when people reach out. And yeah, I feel like there's been a lot of hesitation in the past where people feel like, they can't ask for help or ask for feedback, and we're here for that. So I had another thought and it disappeared, but
Alas. I know I realize we're coming up here very close to 6:30, so I want to be respectful of everyone's time. This kind of just gives a general overview. That I thought we may need for some grounding, but I feel like we covered most of it. So again, you conceptualize the project just to recap this session, and then you apply for that grant, and then you may get the award. And if awarded, then you can create that art. And just be mindful if you do get a grant, please be diligent with responding to your final reporting and make sure that you're following all the requirements as part of that grant award, and all will be good. So now I just want to share a few resources, and then we'll get into Q&A. So again, go to our website. There's a variety of resources there available for your enjoyment, and a variety of links too to send you all across the internet into wonderful rabbit holes. Springboard for the Arts is a great place that Miri also advises. So you get, she's an expert in all the things. And they have some really great resources. So please check out Springboard for the Arts. They offer artist career consultations and free workshops. They're offering a tax session next week that I'm going to attend. So please check that out. And then the Minnesota State Arts Board as well. Feel free to level up from your regional arts council and go for gold with the Minnesota State Arts Board when you feel like you may need more funding. They provide larger grant dollar awards, anywhere from $5,000 to $35,000. So that's a great resource, as well as the McKnight Foundation, and they have fellowship opportunities. Miri could tell you maybe a little bit about a Bush Fellowship. There's so many options out there to pursue your artistry. So start with your regional arts councils and then explore from there. So now we'll get into Q&A. We have a few submitted questions that Tony will read off, and we'll give our answers to those, and then open it up to the floor potentially to see what questions have come through the chat that we can get to as well, which I'm just about to dive into. So how exciting. Kick it off, Tony.
Right, so I'm gonna ask Emma and Miri the questions that you guys have submitted. Feel free to keep dropping them in the chat. Miri and I are watching that to answer any quick ones that we can. And then, yeah, so our first question seems simple, but it's sometimes a toughie. What makes a strong application?
I think it's that success plus thoroughness, in my opinion. Answer every question and don't leave anything out as far as the questions go. Follow the criteria. So one thing you can do afterwards is like we list like what we're going to be scoring you on. So maybe compare your application or ask a friend to compare your application to the criteria. And then also be excited. So make sure like the panel knows that, this is going to impact you, that this funding is going to solve some kind of problem, or, it's going to create a change in your artistic practice. That would be my definitions.
I dig it. Yeah. When it comes down to it, just answer the question. It's as simple as that, but it can get so much more complicated. So, like Miri said, work with folks that have received a grant from ARAC that are maybe applying for one as well. reach out to your networks and get support and just have at least 1 to 2 other people review your application or your idea proposal before you submit it to us too, to make sure like, so many times as an artist, I feel like our ideas can be obscure and obtuse and bizarre in our own minds, and then we put them to paper and it actually works better than expected. So feel free to, reach out to your networks and have them review it and utilize our team too when needed. But I would say a strong application is a project that you can actually bring to fruition too. And it's also one that you want to be passionate about and realistic with as well. So make sure that you set realistic goals for yourself. Be kind to yourself. You will appreciate that as you move through the process. What's the next question?
All right, our next question is, what are your top tips for program evaluation? What what are your best ideas for like, what can I do to evaluate my grant? What can I do to evaluate my work? Especially if I'm not planning on presenting and my grant is more about creation.
See that question in the chat. So I think if you're not planning on having a public component, I would suggest maybe considering some kind of simple public component if possible, because those generally score a little bit higher. But the other alternative is if you're like learning a new skill, or there's something within your skills that you can evaluate by the end of it. It's kind of like like narrative crafting for grants is kind of like telling the story of like something's going to change. So think about like what changes as a result of getting that funding, and then that's going to be what you want to measure.
Well said. Yes. I was looking at the chat here too a little bit, and I see we've got a few questions coming up. And I appreciate the conversation that's going on there as well. What's our next question, Tony?
The next one is just going to be pretty simple. How many grants can I apply for? And specifically, I would love for us to expand a little bit on, can we get the artist equity and individual artist project? Or does it have to be for the same does it have to be for different projects? Can it be for the same projects? And I think we should just do a little PSA on, our fiscal year start. I'm gonna kind of start answering this one, but
yeah,
our fiscal years, ARAC's fiscal year starts in July. So we kind of have a half year. Fall is our first round, spring is our second. So when we talk about, a certain amount of something for a fiscal year, that's the timeline we're talking about for that date. But yeah, I would love to get you guys to, give a little more clarification on how many grants can I apply for?
So technically, yeah, go for it, Mary.
But one thing I'll throw in with it is just that you can't fund the same thing multiple times, so through multiple programs. The only way that kind of can work out is if you're doing it in phases. So say there's like a research phase that you want to pay for your time to do, and then in the other grant, like you're paying for the actual like creation type side of it. So I think that's one thing to consider. And Emma, you probably have even more clear things to articulate with that.
Yeah, essentially, you can apply for more than one grant a year. It is okay. We have not changed our guidelines. Always look at what those guidelines are. There's a lot of writing. You can read through it, but essentially, you can apply for any, as long as it's a different project, you could apply for all the ARAC grants in 1 year. We don't necessarily recommend that because we want to share the funding with everyone. But if you receive a small grant, right now we find ourselves in a place where there's 2 grants being offered. And so this is kind of an interesting situation where you could apply for a small grant and for an art project grant, but it cannot be for the same project if you receive the funding. So if you're applying for a small grant, I would recommend that's a totally different project than the art project grant. So if you get that small grant, it won't hinder you from accepting and being eligible for the art project grant if it's related to the same project. So just separate those projects up so it's very clear that they are different processes, and then you could receive that funding. I would also say that our grant reviewers may be mindful of that too, but that technically should not play into the scoring of your application.
All right, thank you guys so much. And kind of going off of this for our next question, I would love to discuss and define the dates. For example, the project start date. If a lot of artists will do, these are year-long projects. So if they've already started doing a little bit of work, can that be funded through this grant?
Technically, no. So it's a little sticky, and I bet Mary will speak on this too. So technically, all activities and all payments cannot be made before that start date. However, I would say, like, if you've been thinking about it, if you have like random drafts of this project and it's still very much in like this conceptual brain space, but you've started it already, I feel like there's some wiggle room there. It's really when it comes down to the payment. So if you've already purchased supplies and you're applying for a grant, you can still apply for the grant, but we cannot reimburse you for any purchases made before the start date of the grant because this money has to be spent during this particular time period. And so that's what I would say to that question.
Yeah, just to reiterate, it's very connected to the money part. So the money cannot be retroactive, but if you a benefit like on the feasibility of your application is if you've like already reached out to a venue and like on the application you might get asked for like a letter of support or confirmation. If you're talking to venues ahead of time and can get that letter of confirmation that you will have your exhibit or your performance at this space during the grant period, that's totally fine. I think like all the preparation work can kind of happen beforehand. It's just when the money is attached that you can't, be retroactive in that way. So feel free to prepare your projects prior. You just won't get paid for that, right? So.
To give an example, I've had an applicant before I think it was a series of 12 paintings, and they've already finished 3, but it's the rest that they wanted to apply for the grant. So we just kind of segmented that and said that the grant is for these 9. And that's also something you could do is kind of segment. It really is about like a viewpoint for your grant. Okay. Do we have anything more on that one? Oh, really quick on the same topic, Sasha just said, if it's for something that you pay monthly, can the future payments that are after the start date be part of the grant? And I would say yes.
But not the after the end date, right? So like any so like your rental period between June 1st of 2025 and like July 30th or whatever, 2026, all of that 12 months you could apply to pay for the monthly rent or the monthly subscription. You wouldn't be able to apply and get funded for, FY 2025 by applying to pay for future payments in like 2027, right? So it's got to be within that year window. But yeah, subscriptions, rent, all of that for projects is definitely eligible.
Awesome. Okay, so moving on to our next question, let's talk a little bit about the work samples that our applicants have to attach. So especially if you're applying for a grant that you haven't really done this style or you haven't done it in a long time, what should you attach? Should you attach more recent or more relevant? And what kind of advice do you have for applicants who are kind of looking to shift into a new discipline, a new field, a new type, etc.?
I would be clear on your, so you'll be able to put like a work sample description. I would be kind of clear in your work sample description about like what you're trying to show them. So I've done this in the past on grants where like I wanted to shift from, the example I'll give is like I did portraits at one point as a kind of a commissioned painter, and then I did surrealist paintings in my own free time, and I wanted to merge those styles. And I had one painting that demonstrated that and a bunch of paintings that demonstrated the two styles separately. And so in my grant narrative, I still included the portrait samples and I still included the surrealist pieces. But in the work sample description, I like drew their attention to the example that illustrated what I was trying to do. And so I would say like, even if you haven't fully delved into whatever this new medium is that you're attempting, I would still try and include a sample or point to like why your recent work affords you the skills to move into this other direction. So another example is somebody, a recent applicant was talking about using a completely new medium, but they have a design background. And so I told him like, you can show like, I would upload work samples that show your design background, that show that you have like this ability to format an image and the composition, and point to it in like your work sample or your narrative that like that's the skill you're trying to show the panelists through sharing that work sample, and then advise that person to still try and make a sample of something in the style just so that the panel knows the direction that you're trying to go. But yeah, relevance is key. Don't submit, like if you're a singer and you do pottery and you're applying for a grant to do a musical performance, it's definitely not going to help your score to submit the pottery pictures. So make sure it's relevant to what you're applying for.
Yeah, that was very thorough. Gary's got that. Next question. And I'll
Lovely.
also say, I was just looking at the chat too. I'm so sorry we did not represent fiber arts. I love fiber arts. Oh, we will get that on that list. So sorry.
One more thing about the work samples, Elsa just said, as an organization, we are curious about the requirement for artist resume. Do we need art resumes as individual administration or administrators of the organization, or do we craft a resume that represents our organization as a whole? I believe it's representing the artists working on the project. Correct me if I'm wrong.
That is correct.
So yeah, I would just combine those into one single document. It could just, be page, page, page. And that's that.
Because for the organizations, there will be different prompts of supporting documents to provide if you're applying as an organization versus an individual. So make sure that if you are applying for an arts group, organization, fiscally sponsored entity, that you're applying as the organization. So even if you have a fiscal sponsor, you're still applying as an organization.
All right, so moving on to our next question. This is the nitty gritty that I know a lot of artists don't love doing as much as they love their art, but it's time. I'm a data dork and I love finance stuff. So I love talking about budgets, but we're going to talk about the budget a little bit. So let's define in-kind, cash expenses, and total project expenses. So those are the three things that we ask you to put on your application. Do either of you guys want to take this one, or do you want me to?
I vote you,
take this one.
but
If you're feeling passionate about it, go for it.
I've spent all week with Minnesota Council of Nonprofits is doing their finance conference right now, and that's what I've been doing all week. But
yeah, talk
okay,
budgets.
So
let's go for it. Clarify that, and then if anyone has questions of like, is this in kind versus not, you can ask that in the chat.
Perfect. Sorry, give me 1 second. I have like the chat and my info up at the same time. Okay, so total project in kind is the first thing we're going to ask. So this number should be the total amount of any time or items that have been donated to your project. So these are things that you have been given, you didn't necessarily pay for. This is not your time. Pay yourself for your time. Do not include your time here or the cash value of your time, but this should be a number. This should be the cash value of anything donated. And the total cash expense of the project should be, it's worded confusingly in here, and I'm trying to find a better way to do this. Hopefully the next applications in the fall will be more clear on this. We're working on it. But right now what I have on the application says this number should be the total project expenses minus the total project in kind, which doesn't give you a lot. So I will update that for next year. So sorry about that. But since you're here, let me say, so the total cash expense of the project is what you are spending on the project. So that's going to be probably the 4,000 that you're requesting. And then the total project expenses is going to be the in-kind plus the total cash expense of the project. Does that make sense?
If they receive other grants and those are included in that, would that be part of the total cash part of the budget?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
And
Great
then
question. Essentially, all
great
of
question.
your expenses, all of the expenses, your cash expenses are all your expenses other than what's donated or what's by yourself or another entity, whether that's like space. The Minnesota State Arts Board has a very clearly defined, and even Springboard for the Arts too. They have some clearly defined things of what they will count as in kind versus not. We do not have explicit guidelines such as that. So it's almost on a case by case scenario if we do see something that's off. But yeah, we've opened up our budgets too. So you no longer have to fill out a template. You kind of make up your own budget and you show that to us of how you've conceptualized what your expenses are, where your revenue may or may not be. You certainly could include that, but we don't need to see any. That revenue is really like the in-kind contributions. That's voluntary. So I hope that clarifies things.
On here for the total project expenses, it does say this should match your proposed budget. So that should be the final number on how much your project is going to cost. And that's what you're going to be putting in your budget that you can upload or type in as you please. So there's kind of those definitions. And then my next budget question was how, and this might be one for, I know Miri, you've helped me when I've gotten this question in the past. How do I determine how much things cost if I don't know how much they're going to cost yet?
Get a quote.
Yeah. Well, I think so. Okay, how do I determine, how do I determine how much things cost? Yeah, I guess get the quote. Again, we're not going to be doing like the panel's not going to be doing the Googling for you outside, although they'll be bringing their expertise. So there will be like ideally people who work in your same medium. Hopefully, we try to get that representation on the panel. And so they should be aware of like if something is, overpriced or underpriced. Yeah, my brain just spaced. So Emma, do you have any?
I think essentially what I'm gathering from you guys is get a quote if you can. If not, do your best estimate on your expertise on that. And then when you submit your final report budget, you'll submit the actual expenses.
And I would say to overestimate what that cost would be, honestly. Just to have a little wiggle room. So you're not finding yourself in the midst of the project and all of a sudden you have this like exorbitant expense that is going to hinder you from actually completing the project. But we also want you to be realistic with that as well and make sure that all of your grant funds are spent the way in which you hope. And if you have to make an alteration to your budget or your project, just ask us, let us know. Transparency is the best. And so if you get that in writing and say, yes, that is okay, you can change this budget line to this budget line because of X factor that happened. We can talk through that too.
Yeah, I think also people have asked in the past, like if you have to kind of like build out your budget line item like supply by supply. So like this specific brand of paint with, you know, in this quantity or whatever. Some people choose to do that. I think it's good to, you don't necessarily have to do the brands of the paint or the brands of the materials that you're using necessarily, but it is helpful, I think, as far as like that thoroughness goes, to at least like articulate, like if you're gonna do again, painter brain, but if you're going to do an art exhibit and you put a line item for supplies, that you at least say like 10 canvases at this size, you know, like 5 paintbrushes, stuff like that. Because supplies can be very just general, and it is not very specific. And if you just put supplies, then if you remember me saying earlier, you don't want the panel to ask questions. They might ask, what are these supplies? And then, you know, you end up triggering a conversation that didn't need to happen necessarily, because if you would have just, you know, listed what those supplies consist of, then that's one more question that they don't have to spend time on. You don't want people spending a lot of time debating your application. Oh, and that was the question in the chat. Do supplies need to be itemized? So there's a mid, you can be very specific if you want to. But yeah, be more specific than just supplies for just this time. And then like if you're paying yourself, I think our rate that we've talked about in the past has been like 25 an hour at minimum. But if you charge more than that in your role of like making your art, it's a good idea to give the panelists a sense of like how much time it takes to create a piece, how much time you're going to be spending at each part of the process, and then assign a value and maybe explain like why you picked that value, whether it's our recommended 25 an hour or if it's based on like previous amounts that you've charged. Again, we don't want the panel asking questions, so we don't want them to be like, oh, why are they charging, you know, $500 an hour? Right? Like if there's a reason to charge 500 an hour, then totally do it, but you know, explain it.
I think it's also important to remember that our panelists are artists. They are they're supposed to be your peers. We choose our panelists, you know, based off of their experience and how it aligns with the experience of the majority of applicants. And we really do try and match that up. So when you submit your budget, you're not having to convince someone who's never worked in arts. You're not having to convince that one family member who's like, well, that's not a real job. You're not convincing them. These people know you're working hard. These people know that this is worthy. So I think that's an important thing to say as well, because I think people get really anxious when it comes to paying themselves because they're so used to having to argue for the right to have a living, you
For
know.
your worth, I know.
We
Do we
love
have
you
any
guys. You're
more?
worth it.
Yeah. Do we have any more questions you want to toss in the chat here while we wrap up? We're just at 6:50, so I appreciate y'all hanging out with us here. And if you hopped into the call later and maybe missed the first half, don't worry. We'll send more follow-ups and information after this session here. You'll get a nice note from Tony, not only with the slide deck, that would be helpful, and also some forms and supporting documents and like workshop kind of pages for you too. Now is your last call for questions. And has this been helpful? Oh, we got a budget. Itemize the budget.
On the final report.
Yeah. Final budget. Yes and no. Yeah, ideally, yeah. Kind of mirror with the budget that you had submitted with your application, go back to that and then just revise it and update the supplies or update the way in which you spent that $100 differently. And that's a-okay. That is okay. If it changes from the first submission, that's okay. Just not too drastically.
I think that's part of Mary's grants are a mix between excitement and thoroughness. Usually I will say passion and detail. But different words, same thing. So I think with budgets, that's where the detail really comes in. So you can't really add too much detail on a budget. but also don't overwork yourself. But yes,
Yeah, for your
if you're paying
artist
yourself,
type. Mm-hmm. Paying
yeah,
self.
where does that go in the budget?
Mm-hmm.
That would
Artist,
go into your yeah, artist stipend, cash
and I would
expense.
And also listing it, you know, artist stipend versus administrative costs too, so you can differentiate, you know, your painting time versus your admin time, if you'd like. Miri, have you seen that be at different rates, like $25 an hour for admin, $50, you know, 30, 40, whatever dollars an hour for painting or
Yeah, sometimes I mean for like I've mentioned like research, they might, put in hours for research at a lower amount. Shoot, what was I gonna say? So in paying yourself, where does that go on the budget? Okay, keep
I think
talking
it
and I'll remember the important thing I was gonna say.
it it's not like it's nestled under something. It's part of the budget. You'll say artist stipend, X amount of dollars. There you go,
And then
Mary.
yeah, I would say if the budget, if the grant itself does not cover like the total amount of the value of your time, which obviously like, I mean, $4,000 can cover some people's time, but not everybody's. If it doesn't do that, um, what can you do? I've had such a long day. You can just specify, right? Like specify that it is acknowledge it, I guess. Like you can acknowledge that it is a passion project and you realize the value of your work and you are okay with only paying yourself this amount of money. You will be potentially seeking other grant funds, things like that, but just acknowledge it. Because I think sometimes panelists can get a little hung up on if you're like undercharging for the amount of work that you want to do. And I just want to see that people recognize that there is, value and that the grant sometimes doesn't cover that whole value.
And then you
Yeah,
can
I
also
was talking to someone
include,
today.
mm,
Sorry.
it's all
I
good.
was
Go
talking
ahead.
to someone today who had that kind of issue and we were working on because their project will take 4 months per piece and they're planning on doing 3 pieces.
Yeah.
4,000 is not going to cover full time 4 months. So I just told them to kind of explain what their normal hourly rate is and say how much hours the it's been a long day. The grant
Yeah.
has covered, and then say how many hours or how long the piece will take.
Yeah, articulate the feasibility too, right? Like I think the only way that could get you in trouble is if it's the feasibility where like you're undercharging and then it doesn't seem like you've like allocated the time in addition to like getting the grant. So for example, if you have a full-time job outside of being an artist and you're pitching that you're going to do 40 hours a week on the project also with your 40-hour a week job, like that's going to be a feasibility issue. So just make sure that like, you articulate that like I'm taking like some artists have like taken their vacation time on their main job to like dedicate time and all of those hours. So make sure the panel knows where those hours come from so it doesn't become like a question that they ask around feasibility. No questions. We don't want those.
And you can also add your time as in-kind support as well. Would we say? Can we do that? Have you seen that?
I
So I've seen
I
that in a couple of grants before as the in-kind
think you
amount, as the
can.
amount
I
that you
just like
donate.
wouldn't do it. Like I always tell people like please pay yourself first.
Yeah, but if they don't, you know, if you like just can't pay yourself for the amount of hours,
Yeah.
you hypothetically could include that as in-kind as well, in-kind donation of your time to the project. Because just we don't even want to start calculating the amount of voluntary hours at that point too. It's been
I
so fun to see so many folks in in virtual land, but also in the chat too. So I really appreciate you all hanging out with us and for creating artwork in our region.